Alright, so good morning Sir Casaos, good morning dear classmates. I am Joan Canyanes and I am here to start off the Group 2's presentation on classical conditioning. So what is classical conditioning? Well, classical conditioning is a learning theory first discovered by Ivan Pavlov in 1927, and it is a learning process that occurs when the two stimuli are paired together repeatedly. So in other words, it is a learned reflex or response that you do when evoked by a stimulus. To have a better understanding, let's proceed to the next slide. So if you think of classical conditioning as a psychological experiment, you might envision a dog being conditioned to have an association with the sound of a bell. And this is now his famous experiment is all about, which is also very interesting because he discovered this learning theory accidentally. So, before the conditioning, as you can see in the figure, the neutral stimulus is being represented by the bell itself. And when we try to ring the bell, obviously, there will be no response from the dog. Because just like us, as human beings, we are not naturally wired or associated to have a response to a bell. So in this sense, without conditioning, there is no response that will take place obviously. With the second picture, the term unconditioned stimulus is being represented by the food itself. So as opposed to the first situation, the dog here naturally responded or naturally salivates without being conditioned to have such reaction. So his reaction was natural, not thought, and was therefore automatic. So simulating now Pavlov's experiment on classical conditioning. Now, during the conditioning, when we try to ring the bell and at the same time present the dog with the food, he naturally salivates. Not because of the bell, which is a neutral stimulus, but because of the food, which is the unconditioned stimulus. Going back to the definition itself, classical conditioning occurs when the two stimuli are paired together repeatedly. So in this sense, if we are going to repeat the process of ringing the bell before presenting the food over time, the dog will therefore condition to respond to the bell. Now, the dog will salivate or naturally respond upon hearing the bell even in the absence of food. As a result, this response has been conditioned, and salivating to the sound of the bell is a conditioned response of the dog, and the bell has become the conditioned stimulus. Overall, it is worth mentioning that the paired association between two stimuli is being formed through the process of classical conditioning. And at this point, we have explained what is classical conditioning.
Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning and its experiment on the dogs has been taught to be applied in human beings. The behavior or the level of performance of a person is very much dependent to stimulus and how it is being familiarized with the respondent. When a person walks into the room and he didn't know that someone, which serves as a stimulus, is attempting to startle him, probably the response would be very evident in the expression of the person which is being startled. However, when that person knows already that in that place he is usually being startled, or he saw already that the person is hiding to startle him, of course, he won't be shocked and the response would never be the same as before. In this scenario, we will learn that the response of a person is very much dependent to the stimulus.
The theory of classical conditioning is a series of studies done by Ivan Pavlov in his experiment with dogs. In the experiment, Pavlov found that he could cause dogs to salivate just by ringing a bell and then presenting them with food, even if they were not hungry at all after having been conditioned to the bell. In the classroom context, this process translates to eliciting certain reactions from students when they are presented with stimuli or learning material in different forms such as physical objects, instructors, body language, or visual environments. Two of the concrete examples are this one.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, class, we will be having a graded recitation. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So, okay, class, we will be having a graded recitation. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Before conditioning in the first example, the teacher counts down to 20 and the students do not respond since they are obviously unaware of what would happen. So during conditioning, when the teacher announced that there would be a recitation and counted down to 20, the learners began reading from their notes. After conditioning, if the teacher counts down to 20, they will naturally know there will be a recitation. So through classical conditioning, if the teacher is constant and repetitive with the stimuli, the students will eventually learn to behave properly.
Uy, umanggulado. Oo. Ay, hindi ko maaram. Sige, class.
It's quiet.
Oh, okay. I get it.
Class, please quiet.
No, monitor. Magaling ako. Okay.
The teacher claps 3 times to calm the class in the second scenario. In essence, classical conditioning is used to teach learners appropriate behaviors for daily activities without having to tell them what the teacher wants on a daily basis, which means people are trained to perform a certain task or response by providing some sort of trigger. So that wraps up our presentation.